Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. So I am completely overwhelmed with a lot of projects I'm working on at the moment. I've still got a lot of work in progress and things like that. So I thought I would take a break from some of that today and discuss what I think may be a useful topic for some of you, and that is the things that I'm doing and thinking about in the early stages of preparing for what is very likely to be a pretty crazy election cycle. Right up front, I want to say that I have no idea as to what's going to happen. We all kind of have some pretty, general idea that things are going to get pretty crazy, or they may be pretty crazy, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that as the election season gets a little bit closer. For now, I want to start by talking about some of the things that I'm thinking about and trying to do in the very early stages. So think of this as kind of like a early stage election preparedness kind of thing. I will re-examine the topic in the summertime as kind of like a mid-range kind of thing as the election gets closer, and then of course just in a couple of weeks before the election I plan to do another one of these and talk about some of the last minute preparations that you might want to take if things start looking like it's going to get like out of hand, right? So I've got my notes and let's go ahead and get at it. In retrospect, looking at all the ideas that I have written down here, I realize that a lot of what I have to say is pretty scary to think about. I don't intend for it to be, but I think that, at least for me personally, I'm at a crossroads where it's really easy to focus on a lot of the very, very bad things in the world. Likewise, it's also very, very easy to focus on only the good things and kind of ignore the bad things to the point of being very, very dangerous. I see this happening quite a lot all over the internet, right? We've got kind of the doomer culture, which is a cultural thing, but we've also got people kind of mostly in like the commercial space, where they're just kind of ignoring these problems because they don't want their livelihood to be stripped away from them if they identify some of the causes of some of these problems. I am trying to kind of take the best of both ideas, right? I'm not going to ignore all the bad things that are going on right now just for the sake of, kind of protecting a business model. We all have to do that to some degree. And I think that this really starts to matter now because, I have always tried to do the kind of balanced approach where we talk about the bad stuff, no matter how scary it is, and just as a way of acknowledging it and preparing for it, but we don't dwell on it. We learn from it, and we can focus on the good stuff, right? So learning about the bad is a way of moving into the good stuff. However, this is challenging now because it turns out that when it comes to most things, even talking about the bad stuff just to learn about it is so horrifically awful that there's no real way to make it sound not scary. So please just keep that in mind. I really am genuinely not trying to scare people with this stuff, but some of these ideas are pretty heavy. So full disclaimer, I'm going to talk about some heavy stuff today. And when it comes to what I'm really trying to think about for moving forward, the beginning part of 2024, as we move into the summer and get closer to what's probably going to be pretty crazy, I've kind of got two different ideas and two different things I'm thinking about. One is the stuff that you probably want to hear about the most, but actually matters the least, and that's the gear stuff. The normal prepper stuff, the things that you can go online and buy. Your standard preparedness things. This stuff I'm focusing on, so we'll talk about that. But really the more important things are some of the ideas that I'm kind of trying to work through and prepare for, and considerations to think about right now. I try to kind of make these decisions now rather than wait until later and be faced with kind of a moral dilemma when the chips are down. So enough rambling on all of that. Let's talk about some of the physical things that I'm doing, some of the more practical things that I'm doing to make sure that, we have a lot more options moving into the future. And that's one of the themes when it comes to preparedness. And I think that that's something that it kind of goes unspoken in the prepping world when it comes to just buying and selling gear and stockpiling and things like that. But why do we do this, right? Why do we prepare for things? The main reason is so that we can have options when other people do not. Not necessarily because we're trying to be better than them or be more prepared than them or, anything like that, but we want to keep our options open as long as humanly possible. And turns out prepping allows us to do that a lot of times. Now, COVID's over. We kind of went through that gambit of everybody jumping on the prepping train and learning a lot of things, and I think we learned a lot about ourselves and others during COVID. And one of the things that I think the prepping community learned is, it was a good shakedown, right? It was a good shakedown exercise. People learned a lot of the things that we now know, right? Don't buy food unless you can eat it, right? Don't buy things unless you're going to use it. So hopefully now that, a couple of years has passed since everybody went out and panic bought, they now know, okay, maybe not buy 50 cans of food that you don't actually like to eat, simply to stockpile it. So general things like that. Food, water, shelter, sanitation, the basics. Chances are if you're watching this, you probably already have most of that covered, but this is just a good reminder just to go through, check everything, make sure you're all good to go. And this is kind of a clue for later. Make sure that you're starting to think about people you might not be planning for. I will go into more detail in just a moment with personnel concerns, but this is kind of the thing to where everybody loves the memes, right? They love to talk really hard on the internet. And when, your unprepared neighbors come knocking, right? When they can't get food at their grocery store and they know that you're the only one who has food. Well, this is a whole different internet debate we can go down another day, but I'm just saying, when it comes to certain people, coworkers, friends, neighbors, loose contacts, I'm not talking about strangers out there, but I'm talking about people who you may know, who have your phone number, who may call you at 3 in the morning because their child has no food and they know you've got some. So we want to avoid these moral dilemmas in the first place, and if you can do that by helping others, either by encouraging them or preparing a little bit in some way, maybe that's a good thing to start thinking about now. But again, this is a huge debate, and I don't possess one opinion or another, right? How strange is that for someone on the internet to say, I don't really know how to think about this? When was the last time you heard anyone say, I don't have an opinion on this? I kind of feel this way with regards to preparing for other people. I don't really know how to feel about it, but I can tell you, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do in that situation, and if that means that I have to go hungry, then so be it. So yeah, I really want to kind of avoid that situation in the beginning, and if we can do that now, start thinking about it now. Just saying, right? When it comes to other preparedness things, of course, the basics, food, water, shelter. If you don't have the basics down, go to the FEMA website and download the FEMA list of 3-day emergency supplies. That's the best place to start for people who have no idea as to where to begin. We all have feelings about FEMA and all that, but for people who are a little bit put off by the crazy Uber apocalypse, prepper website, a government website is probably a little bit more socially acceptable to some people who may not be preparing right now. I can guarantee you that I would probably have a better success rate giving someone the FEMA list with that FEMA logo on it. And it's not a bad list. The basic 3-day supply. You could plus that up to 7 days, 2 weeks, whatever. It's a good basis to start from. You can go find, the International Red Cross, the American Red Cross kind of lists. Again, political feelings about some of these institutions aside, the documentation they provide is very, very good for people who don't understand the severity of what's going on. So another thing to think about is finance. I don't want to get too much into this, but we all know what happened in Canada with regards to the trucking protests and some of the more perfectly peaceful demonstrations. We know what happened to the concept of digital banking and online banking. So in that case, cash is king. Just a good reminder that the only way that someone can take your cash and prevent you from spending your money with cash is if they come and physically take it from you. So it's really easy to click some buttons and shut down your bank account. We already know that basically everything that has a 1 and a 0 attached to it, every transaction, every text message, every piece of digital information is monitored in some way. Now, just because it's monitored doesn't mean that actions are taken on it, but it does mean that that's a vulnerability, and you don't want to get into a situation to where your bank account gets shut down because of you donated to the wrong GoFundMe website, and you're screwed. So something to think about. Having cash on hand helps. Alternative currencies, we'll talk about that another day. I know people want to immediately bring in things like precious metals and crypto and things like that. That's another talk for another day. I'm just thinking about early on, maybe now's the time to get, some cash back every time you go to the grocery store, it might help later on. Just saying. Really, these physical preparedness things are, I don't want to get into the habit of predicting a specific event will happen, because I think it's disingenuous, and I think that, nobody can really tell right now, but we can generally tell protests are going to happen. We already know what has already happened. Checkpoints being set up. There are checkpoints in New York City on the subway system right now, we already know what's happening, right? We see the trends. This is not, fear-mongering to say that you're going to probably have to show papers again at some point. This has already happened, and because it happened once, it's probably going to happen again. Maybe for a different reason, maybe for the same one, who knows. All I know is that preparing to live in a situation where you've got checkpoints, you've got mandates, you've got papers, you've got a lot of people with a lot of rifles walking around, this might be something to prepare for, especially if you live in kind of like an urbanized center. So we all know that's exactly going to happen. As soon as the riots start happening, the National Guard comes out and, just creates a lot of problems for people like us who aren't going to be rioting, we're just trying to sit at home, live our lives, right? But we're still going to be affected by these checkpoints. So something to think about. I know people don't want to talk about it, right? But we're all thinking it, so I might as well say it. Another thing I'm thinking about is comms, radio stuff. I know everyone's least favorite topic, except for the guys who like radio. I personally detest working on radio stuff. It makes me the most frustrated ever. I get a super bad migraine a lot of times when working with radio stuff, so please don't think that I'm some radio guy. I'm not. I can't stand this stuff, but I have to. I have to learn this stuff, because if my profession is in the information space, that's my contribution at the moment to, a better world, I guess, if you want to call it that. So, because of that, I think that if a person works in an information space kind of job, if they have information to send and they can't send it, what good are you, right? If I can't send those wire reports out via radio at some point, then what good am I, right? If I can't send a daily news update out when there's no infrastructure, then, what good am I? I'm just going to sit here and look at my computer screen. It's useless. So that's why I have to develop these kinds of things. I think that the GhostNet plan that we've created for kind of, HF radio, and it's kind of like an emergency stopgap sort of thing, I think that's probably the largest network, created by people who really detest radio in the world. There's more people on that frequency a lot of times than on the main JS8 call frequencies. So, I think that's kind of a cool aspect of it. Please don't think that I love radio. I really don't. I just have to get used to it and have to use it. So, for those of you out there who are not into radio and you don't see any value in any kind of radio stuff, please know that I understand. I really do. That's why I created those couple of tutorials on how to get started with this stuff for free, so that you can kind of get your foot in the door, understand the frustrations, understand the problems with it. You don't need a license to get started listening. You don't need to buy anything to get started listening. You can just use your internet browser and learn how this stuff's set up. That's where I would recommend to get started if you're interested. Not everybody's going to be interested. And of course, I don't want to act like the stuff that I've done is the greatest thing ever. It's not. It's really quite poor, I think, in terms of the capabilities that it provides for the effort that you have to put into it. However, it's all we've got, and I think that having some option, no matter, even if it's not really a great fit, having some option is better than nothing. We've already had multiple cell phone outages, nationwide outages, internet outages, platforms going down, social media, just because it goes offline for an hour, people seem to forget about it. But, look, this is important stuff. And during these outages, I was able to literally hop on the GhostNet, pull up JS8 call, pull up some of these HF radio tools, and see people sending their local news reports from their local area. How amazing is that? That is awesome. When there's nothing out there, at least I caught at least half a dozen people from my area pushing, local news reports from their local area. A couple people are even transmitting the wire. So, me receiving my own news report via radio that's pretty cool. So, Anyway, along with the radio stuff, I'm kind of focusing a lot on energy needs again, just to make sure that, if I lose power or, I have to operate where I don't really have power, energy needs are important as well. Now, when it comes to some of the more theoretical things, I'm kind of focusing on the basic preps, checking and making sure that, all my stuff's good to go on that front. I think we're all kind of squared away, at least me, I'm personally kind of squared away. You can always be more prepared, but in terms of what I'm likely to be doing is sitting behind a computer during a contingent situation and battle tracking stuff and pushing out reports and stuff. That's my role to fill, right? If you're an infantryman, if you're a grunt, you have a different role to fill. So, that might be something to think about. That's my job to fill, and, that's just kind of the way that it is. So I feel like I'm kind of the only person on the internet or on YouTube who is not I'm not a grunt. I'm not an infantry guy. I'm not going to be out there standing and holding a rifle, on the berm. And if I am, things have gone very, very horribly wrong, and you're not going to see any more intel from me. Planning for the most likely scenario is probably a little bit better of a solution. It's more likely for me to grab a computer and go to work and do the best I can in that regard, rather than trying to go out there and be something that I'm not. I'm certainly not skilled in those ways. And this kind of plays into some of the more theoretical things that I'm thinking about, the long shot thoughts, right, with regards to personnel concerns. So this is kind of a tough one, right? And we start getting into, well, this is personal choice. But one of the things that I personally learned a lot from COVID and the kind of lockdowns and interesting situations that arose from that when it comes to the freedom of travel is that a lot of people are spread out a lot. People have a lot of family, a lot of friends, coworkers all over a city. They're not really, sure, based on the economic situation, a lot of people are moving back in with either parents, or they're moving parents back in with them, or they're having a more communal kind of way of living. But a lot of people out there, have kids away at school, or they have, friends and contacts who live on the other side of town. People are kind of spread out a lot, and that's a huge concern for readiness. Just getting things right out in the open. I got an awful lot of emails from a lot of people. We're talking like hundreds of emails from people during COVID who said, hey, look, I had, grandma across town. There was a riot that broke out, and I had to go rescue her because her house was in kind of like a dilapidated area, and she had to get out of Dodge, right? So here's me in my minivan having to go launch a rescue mission, unarmed, unprepared, in the middle of an afternoon when I can take an hour off from work as an emergency. And I got a lot of these emails, so it seems like it's a fairly common thing for people to have to do is launch these haphazard, unplanned, high-risk rescue missions, if you want to call it that. When a riot goes down, we've all seen the footage of people, the absolute gridlock when somebody gets shot and it doesn't look like it's a good shoot, to the media at first. And we see a riot potential breaking out, and everybody, as soon as 5 o'clock hits, they're out of town, right? So the absolute gridlock on a lot of these highways. We've seen this multiple times in multiple cities. So that might be something to prepare for a little bit more than you might think. And I have two main thoughts about that. The first thought that I have is something probably people aren't going to want to hear, and that is me coming at things from kind of like I guess like a public response attitude, and that is, look, it's a lot easier to evacuate early than it is to evacuate during a contingent situation. It is a lot easier to get people out of harm's way, out of Dodge, before the crisis occurs. Evacuating early really is the best shot for most people. Now, again, just to temper kind of any scary thoughts, I'm not saying you need to evacuate now. Like, you don't need to grab your bug-out bag and head for the hills. You're probably not going to have to do that at all. Most people probably aren't. Even no matter how crazy things get, this country is pretty spread out. If you're in a city, yeah, I mean, you might be facing some pretty tough situations. So that's why I'm talking about it in the beginning. But look, it may be easier to, grab grandma, have her, sleep in your spare bedroom or whatever, for a couple of days, just if something looks like it's getting ready to kind of pop off. And the reason that you want to do this is because, one, it's easier and safer. You assume less risk evacuating or transferring personnel before the crisis happens. The other reason that you may want to consider something like this is really along the lines of some more like military doctrine sprinkled here and there. And that goes back to places like Vietnam or even today, South Sudan, where the concept of the protected villages is most certainly in effect. You bring people out of the countryside where the bandits are, and you bring them into a village, a concentrated area where you can protect that. Now, I have some thoughts on that, and we'll be doing a dedicated video on this idea in the future, because that can take a very dark turn for some of you who may be able to identify the problems with this. Not going to get into that now. I'm just saying that, look, if you've got grandma across town, you've got your aunt and uncle, at the next town over, and you've got the space, it might be a little bit better to bring them in for a couple weeks, have a little vacation. Bring them in for a couple of weeks just while things are crazy so that you don't have to worry about them, right? Because if I'm sitting in, my talk or my house or whatever, and I'm thinking about grandma because she's in a really bad part of town or a place that could become a bad part of town, and I'm thinking, all right, when's she going to let me evacuate her? That's the kind of thing you've got to think about. And it's a lot easier if they're, take the hostages out of the equation, so to speak, if you know what I'm saying, right? A little easier to do it that way. Now, again, this is something people aren't going to want to hear, and people are probably not going to want to do. There's a lot of very independently minded people out there who don't really see the need to go this far. Like, they may see, this is just an overreaction. I'm not going to go crash on your couch for a couple of weeks, man. I'm fine. I've got my own apartment. Don't worry about it. I'm living in the dorms. It's okay. We're all good here. We're perfectly safe, right? We've all heard this before. So, for people like that who still want to be, pretty independently minded, but you still realize, look, man, they are not prepared. Maybe it might be a good idea to just help them out a little bit with supplies or logistics or things like that. If you've got an aunt or an uncle and they're living by themselves, in an apartment or out in the middle of nowhere or someplace like that, just go take them an armload of groceries, just some extra supplies to get them through a couple of weeks of craziness, if it looks like that might be an option. I'm not saying go absolutely crazy now, but I guarantee you it will be appreciated. And while you're at it, hey, here's maybe a good opportunity to talk about things like radios and Meshtastic if you have to, bring along a small little AM/FM radio, maybe a small shortwave receiver if you've got one, and kind of maybe a little cheat sheet on how to work it and stuff like that. You kind of see where I'm going with this. You can prepare people on the cheap without expending too many resources, and we get into what I was kind of talking about at the beginning of, well, if they're not going to prepare now, I'm not going to help them. That's not really a total solution, is it? We've still got people that we care about in our lives sometimes that may not necessarily understand the severity of what's going on, and they may not want to prepare themselves. So just a couple extra resources. Maybe go take a case of water and leave it at the office. A couple of cases of bottled water costs nothing, and you can leave it in the break room, or leave it in your office or something like that, just in case, right? We don't want to go whole hog and just start ordering cases of MREs for total strangers, right? That's just not financially viable, but the just tiniest bit of preparedness can help quite a lot. And it prevents you from having to expend more expensive resources later on. If it's cheaper for me right now to go take grandma an armload of groceries than it is for me to expend significant resources, potentially start taking physical injuries and medical issues to go get grandma when things go sideways, then, maybe it was worth it to prepare somebody else that you don't have to prepare for later on, right? Just something to think about. I don't really have a, solid opinion on any of this, but I'm just, things I'm thinking about for the future. Another thing that I'm trying to plan for, or something that at least I'm thinking about constantly, is the concept of the work schedule. I understand that for a lot of people, prepping is kind of a luxury. Being able to take time off to work on radios or respond to an issue, that's also a luxury as well. So I understand, and I guarantee you that if NASA were to get on TV tomorrow morning and say that there's an asteroid coming to Earth to wipe out all life as we know it, about 95% of all jobs in America would still expect you at work at 8 a.m. the next day. So I understand that right now we're in this really tough spot where everyone's having to work, sometimes multiple jobs. People, even in first world nations, are having a hard time affording food. And that is weighing on me a lot. And I understand that me going out there and telling people, well, just, take some free time. Well, what free time? Nobody has that. So that's why I am taking on a lot of roles. That's why I do the Wire now. I had not planned on doing the Wire reports every single day. I hadn't planned on doing that. I was only going to do it topically, but guess what? It's become important and people seem to find value in it. So I'm going to continue doing things like that because I can. I do have the ability to do that. Sometimes it's not very good, but it's the best that I can do, right? So I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to continue working on automation. I'm going to continue working on some videos that maybe make things a little easier to understand so that you don't have to do what I do and spend 16 hours a day trying to figure out how to do the smallest tiny thing on radio and scour the internet for forums, scrolling through endless walls of people asking, well, why would you ever want to do that? Well, just give me the answer, I know how frustrating this is, so I'm going to continue working on things that make it a little bit easier for those of you trying to be a little bit more prepared, capable, things like that. Moving into what I think is probably a very serious topic and very inflammatory. So please be advised that I understand this is controversial. I understand that this gets really spiritual really quickly. I don't intend for it to be, but there's no way that it can't. And this is what I'm calling the idea of leaving the door open. Specifically, leaving the door open for people who may want to make changes to their lifestyle or their profession, mostly their profession, when things get a little bit more severe. I know that it may not seem like it, and I don't mean to trivialize people's experiences and hardships out there, but in the United States, as hard as things are, I can say pretty confidently that the United States' hardship right now is not nearly as bad as it can be, for one, and there are a lot of very, very suffering places. There are a lot of very desperate people on this earth, and right now, the United States thinks it's dealing with hardship, but it's not really in most places. Now, there are very, very desperate places, as we can see all over the internet and all over social media. So I don't mean to trivialize it. We've got, zombie land out there in some places of the country. But by and large, the United States has been very, very lucky to not have to deal with widespread famine, to not have to deal with widespread disease and issues like that. So, with that being said, there are going to be people in the future that want to make a change, and they want to, see the light and stop being a part of the problem and start being a part of the solution. As much as I want to let my own personal feelings cloud the issue and just say, there are no good people left in some of these institutions. That's what I want to think, but I can't plan for that. If I'm trying to be, a little bit more open-minded about things, I realize that, look, I worked in federal government or with federal government for about 10 years before COVID hit and my plans changed, somewhat willingly and somewhat unwillingly. And I realize that there are a lot of people working in very, very, very bad institutions that 6, 8, 10 months from now may realize, all right, enough's enough. I'm going to take the brown shirt off and I'm going to start actually helping people instead of hurting people. As painful as it is to see a lot of the very, very bad things coming from a lot of institutions in the United States, I am fairly confident that, in the future, we're still going to have some good people come forward and say, look, you were right, I was wrong, and I can't support this behavior anymore. It's going to be very few people, and as time goes on, it'll be even fewer. Right now, we can definitely see a purge kind of happening amongst a lot of, for instance, U.S. government institutions where the number of good people in certain jobs is rapidly dwindling. But I also know, and this is really what I'm trying to do personally, it's challenging, but I'm trying to also recognize the fact that it is never, never, never too late to do the right thing. It is really challenging for me. It really is. because I see what some of these people have done, and I don't want to get into the habit of saying, look, you want to, let these people in who have caused so much harm. We want to let them into the fold after this. I don't know the answer to this, but let me share just one reason why I think that we really need to leave the door open and allow people the opportunity to do the right thing, even if it's at the late hour, right? Just me sharing a personal anecdote that may help. In the later part of my career, one of the issues that I was working on overseas is the concept of targeting in Iraq and Syria. So I was part of the overall mission to take the fight to ISIS and eliminate ISIS in Iraq and Syria. Now, as many of you know, that was a very, 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 very bad mission, and I did not support most of what happened and what I saw. And because of that, myself and a few others, really, even though we were, targeting, we were trying to figure out ways, and working with the local Iraqis and Syrians in some cases, trying to figure out how can we avoid killing these guys. War is never good. It's always going to have very, very bad things happen. And again, I don't want to get into it too much, but one of the things that we found out very early on is that one of the main reasons why people continued to be in ISIS, maybe not join ISIS, but stay in ISIS, is because they felt like they had nowhere else to go. They felt like their villages had abandoned them. Their family had written them off. Their family had said, you can't come home anymore. So these dudes, very young kids in a lot of cases, they were outcast from their society. They were kicked out of their village. Their family had disowned them. And they felt, well, might as well put on that vest over there. That's what they felt like. They felt like they had nowhere else to go. And, like it or not, I'm not trying to get into the whole moral debate here, but like it or not, it may have been a better option to try to get the locals to bring these people back into the fold, because a person who wants to stop killing, but they feel like they have no choice but to continue killing is a very dangerous person, right? Now, take that idea and apply just a tiny bit of that to the United States. If we want people, either in some of these institutions like the military, national federal agencies, local police in some cases, if we want them to stop the behavior that they're committing against the American people in some cases, if you want to get the bad, you're probably never going to get the baddest of the bad. But if you've got people who feel like they have nothing better, they have nothing else, they might as well stay on the payroll. That's not good. So we want to offer them the door and allow them to change their ways in such a way that they don't feel like a social pariah. It's challenging, and I don't personally agree with it in many cases, but I'm telling you that this is going to matter, and I think this is something people tend to leave out and forget. Look at what happened already, and this has been completely forgotten. Look at all of those military service members who did the right thing when it comes to the COVID vaccine. They refused an illegal order. We know that this order was illegal. It has been proven in every court in the land that this is an illegal order. And how many people got kicked out for that? Around 8,000 or so. And it continues to happen. You had service members endure torture. You had service members endure retributions and retaliatory actions that's still continuing to this day. And what has the American people done for these people? The American people were shouting at all those, National Guard soldiers holding shields against the American people. And when those people decided, enough's enough, I'm going to start doing the right thing, and I'm going to get out of this institution, what did the American people do? They ignored it. They said, great, good job, fine. And then they went back to their Netflix and Starbucks. Yeah, we had crowdfunding for a lot of the people that experienced some of the more high-profile incidents, and that's fantastic. But by and large, there's a lot of service members out there who quietly got out, who did their time, and they said, you know what, enough's enough. They may even be, jabbed, right? They did that to themselves because they felt they had no other option at the time, and then they realized afterwards, oh my gosh, and then they got out. Think about it like this. Somebody who enlisted in the U.S. military in 2020, the year 2020, after all of this stuff happened, right? They're coming to the end of their first enlistment now. So they're looking, and we want to make sure that that soldier out there says, hey, it is better for me to leave these institutions than to be caught up in a bad situation where I've got to make a moral decision that may or may not be good for me, but probably won't be good for anyone else. So we want to offer, a better life. Same thing with a lot of these corrupt, everything from, corrupt law enforcement to corrupt politicians to some of these, big companies that just leaned really, really hard into the woke ideology. We want to offer them a chance to do better, and we want to make that option available for them. Now, I know this gets tricky. I know it gets very, very sticky, and a lot of people out there have the mentality of no amnesty for what was done to them or their family during the past couple of years. And in most cases, I completely agree with that idea. I really do. I'm not saying that we need to just ignore all the things that were happening, and the nice lady living down the street, your neighbor Sally who turned you into the police for having more than 3 people in your home. I'm not saying that we should, forget that. And I'm not saying that you need to assume operational risk just for the sake of taking the high road. I'm just saying that this is really something we need to think about. And I don't know of any other way to do it than to allow people the chance to do better and not demonize them for it. Because I can tell you, if all of these people doing very bad things, right, there's going to be a lot of people that enjoy this, right? Why do you think the IRS has had tens of thousands of people apply? It's because a lot of times people working for the federal government enjoying hurting people, and that's why they get into these certain jobs. Now, I'm not talking about those people. I'm not talking about the sadistic people who get into a job because they have a shiny piece of metal on their shirt that allows them to hurt people, and that's why they get into that job in the first place, because they're sadistic and they enjoy it. There's a lot of those people, in case you haven't noticed. But there's also a lot of people who maybe were 11 Bravos. They were in the military, they got out. What better job is there for a grunt in the early 2000s than to be a street cop, right? Trying to help their community and do the best they can, right? They get into the job, they do the best they can, and then they realize, a lot of people around me don't want to do this, Same thing with any other public service. The medical field, good grief, right? We talk about, how awful it is to be a Fed these days and how awful and evil these people are. Let me tell you something. The medical field, oh boy, I have met a lot of very, very sadistic people in the medical field, and it's sad because, it's a field where altruism really can shine if you let it. Like, what more wholesome thing can there be than someone who wants to help people? Good grief, that's the best, job you can have, in my opinion. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who are in it just for the money, and there's a lot of people out there who are in it for other reasons. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of that dark stuff later, if I can figure out a way to do it without sounding utterly, negative. But really, this kind of unscheduled rant is really to encourage people to realize that slamming the door in the face of people that may help you later is probably not the best thing to do, even though we may want to do it. I'm not saying we need to go out there and start drinking Bud Light because they said they're sorry. No. Words without actions are useless, in my opinion. I think that if someone out there genuinely wants to make a change and genuinely says, I'm going to make a change, and they do it, they start saying, hey, look, I'm not going to be a part of these institutions anymore. I'm not going to be a part of these harmful things, and I'm going to start doing something else. That's great. We need to support more of that, right? And all I'm saying is something we need to think about, right? Because right now, it is so easy to get stuck into us versus them. It's so easy to get stuck into, these people are beyond saving. That may be the case for most people out there, but I know that there are some good people left who want to do the right thing, and they are screwed, and I want to make them less screwed. So just thinking about that, I'm not saying we need to have a whole, kumbaya moment. Just saying something to think about is maybe not completely voiding people who may want to help in the future, because it's going to happen. As bad as things are right now, it can get so much worse. And when it does get worse, there's going to be an awful lot of people who did not see the light because they were insulated from it. They were far away and they didn't see the badness, and they're going to want to make some changes. So just saying, may not be the best idea to avoid these people. Now, another thing that I really am trying to work on personally, because I suck at this, is stress management. I realize that a lot of these dualities are very, very, very stressful. And these times that we're living through right now are absolutely the kind of times that test both your faith, your personal convictions, your core values, all of this stuff, right? You know, I thought I had life all figured out. I think many of us thought we had all life figured out. We had our careers planned, we had our education planned, we had a whole plan for the future. And now, you know, I think many of us, myself included, are just living day to day, just trying to make it. And this is going to increase in the future. And all of this means that stress is certainly a part of our lives now. And I mean like the extreme health problem inducing stress. And one of the things that's stressful for me, and it's directly related to the last point, is look, I right now don't have the luxury of dealing with or interacting with super nice people a lot of times. I know, strange, right? But I feel like people kind of ignore this. The people out there who get on YouTube and have a great, fantastic community that's all wholesome with the white picket fence, and you know, they're able to defend their community and work together and things like that. They may argue here and there, but they're all driven together by a common goal. You know, I don't have that, and I guess that a lot of you probably don't have that either. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about community development in the future and some of the challenges that you're going to have to overcome that a lot of people ignore because they don't, or maybe not ignore, but they probably just don't have these problems. I'll talk more about that in the future, but really what I'm trying to say is I feel like I have to interact with a lot of people that I really don't like. And it's in the interest of being better, doing better, and the number of people, like I'm a pretty easygoing guy, like in, you know, my day-to-day life, I can get along with pretty much anybody. And you know, it's getting really hard for even me. Like, you know, I'm not saying that I'm the best at this kind of thing, but look, in my, you know, professional life, I've worked many jobs, and every place I've ever worked, people will definitely say about me that I can get along with anybody. I can get along with anybody under any circumstance, any situation. There are very few people that I can't get along with in some form or fashion to get the job done. However, these days, the world is rapidly eclipsing my skills and abilities on that front. I feel that every day that goes by, maybe I'm just getting older and it's starting to make me a little bit more curmudgeon-y, I guess, but I feel that, you know, a lot of times I'm having to talk with people and interact with people and plan and work with people, you know, outside of, you know, my family unit, outside of my organization here, but like in my day-to-day life. And I'm just getting nowhere. I'm up against a brick wall a lot of times. It used to be, man, I could probably go into a riot in the middle of a fist fight and I could break it up. You know, I could probably just get in there, start meeting people, start getting to know people. The more they know you, the faster you can establish a personal connection with somebody, the least likely they are to hit you. You can move in and do stuff like that. Nowadays, I can't do that anymore. You know, I've either lost that skill or society has degraded to a point to where it's just really hard for me to work with a lot of people now. And I feel that in order to have the effectiveness I had in the past, I have to compromise a lot. Sometimes it feels like I have to compromise on my core values and personal beliefs, and that I will not do. So, you know, we're in a rock and a hard place, and that's super stressful when people are just giving you nothing. And I feel like I'm not meeting people across the aisle. I feel like I'm not compromising. I feel like I'm jumping across to their side. Just getting people to talk to you now and not treat you like a piece of garbage is challenging. It is really, really hard, even in this community that I work in, to have a person be kind to you. you know? It's really hard, and I feel like because I have had so much difficulty with this in my own personal life, I feel very, very committed and dedicated to trying to be a lot nicer to people than I think I should be, because you never know, and people are going through some really tough times now, so maybe people are a little bit more blunt and stressed and at the end of their rope more than you think. I definitely know that's the case, probably even with me, but I just think that trying to do the best you can, and leaving the door open for people to have a little bit more leeway sometimes is probably not a bad thing to do. On the other hand, we can have this whole debate of you can't give people an inch anymore. You cannot yield 1 centimeter to anyone because they will take that rope and hang you with it. You know, that's a unfortunate part of living in the world today, but in the interest of not being super negative all the time, I just think that I'm willing to let people talk a lot more nowadays. I'm willing to let people vent. I don't know what it is about me, but my family experiences the same thing as well. You're just going out to the grocery store and just talking with the cashier or talking with somebody in the aisles, and the number of people that have just vented their life to me, standing, at their cart in a grocery store is pretty high lately. It seems like it happens almost every time. And I just let them talk, And some people need that, just to talk to a complete and total stranger. And that really indicates to me a lot of things. And one of those is that people are very stressed. They're at the end of their rope a lot of times, and they need to be able to function in the world today, and that's very hard to do. Things that I can do to make that easier for people is to not shut that door for them. Make it so that people who want to do the right thing have that option, and they don't feel like, well, they're never going to accept me now because of what I've done to people. It's a hard thing. It's a very hard thing, but I'm just trying to get these ideas out there because maybe we need to start thinking about this a little bit more. There's going to be people that want to make a change in their life. There's going to be people that are so stressed that they do very, very, very serious things because they feel that they have no other option left. And we want to make these people feel like they do have options, that they can change their ways, that they don't have to live super, super stressed all the time because they're conflicted internally with what they've done or what they continue to do. So, yeah, that's a pretty heavy topic, isn't it? I don't think anyone was expecting, myself included, to kind of talk about these very severe and very heavy issues, but I think that it's probably a good idea to talk about them early on so that we can build on these ideas as we get closer to, what's probably a crazy time. Now, one of the final ideas that I wanted to talk about is the concept of money, or rather the lack of it. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and this is probably not the greatest analogy for the United States, but I've been really doing a lot of soul searching, a lot of research, and one thing that is really weighing on my mind a lot is the concept of extreme poverty, extreme famine, and extreme desperation. I know, cheery topic, right? But, everybody goes through phases, right? And I think my latest phase is the idea of desperation prevention, I guess if we want to call it that. And, I read a lot of stories about extreme situations around the planet. I've even seen quite a few myself firsthand. And though it is very, very challenging to kind of put like a situation of widespread famine and widespread hyperinflation and things like that into a context in America, it's really hard to cherry pick that knowledge because America is such an interesting and unusual place. And I'm not saying that the United States is going to become Darfur or anything like that. I'm just saying that right now in the content creation culture, we see a lot of people just recommending you buy very expensive things and that will solve your problems. And I'm trying to think a little bit more broadly than that. Now, of course, I will agree. Things like, basic preparedness things, tools of the trade, right? Firearms. You need your tools of the trade, right? defensive things. You need things like night vision and thermal and things like that may be a year's salary for some people, are really kind of necessary. Body armor is not cheap, and all this tactical stuff is, you can get away with as minimalist of a setup as possible, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to spend an awful lot of money just to maintain a baseline of self-defense capability. Now, the reason that I want to start talking about this now is because what's around election time? Christmas, right? We've got the holiday season coming up. As the later parts of the year start creeping in, financial desperation is going to be very common, I think. So people are going to have less options financially. They're probably going to spend a lot on the holidays, or a significant portion of their, income on the holiday season, travel, even energy costs, like energy bills. Like my local co-op, over the months of December and January, inexplicably just raised the rates, and they just did it, right? Can they do it? No. Did they do it? Yes. It's going to happen for a lot of people. I've, got an energy bill where I can measure my consumption, and my consumption didn't change at all. As a matter of fact, it went down a lot because I try to use a lot of wood heating, and the bill goes up, skyrockets, 40%, 50% increase. And so I'm trying to plan for that in the future, and basically say that if you're going to have to economize so that you can have options later in the year, it might be better to do it in the summertime. Trying to plan early on in the year is probably a good thing to do, so that by the time you get to the end of the year, you're not broke. You don't have high energy costs, high costs for just surviving, high food costs, and now you've got to deal with the impacts of like rioting or unrest or checkpoints or something like that. Better to have options later, and if you're going to have to economize, it's probably better to do it in the summertime and the springtime rather than wait until much, much later. I know that, going out and suggesting to people to go buy an extra load of groceries for a family member, that might not be financially viable for a lot of people. A lot of people, especially in my local area, they just can't afford the full cart of groceries anymore. They're just barely making it. So I understand that suggesting that might be disingenuous, but I still think that you can do a lot for very little in this country. Even as high priced as things are now, we've still got options, and I'm just saying that it might be a good idea to start taking advantage of some of those options. And the reason that I kind of think about it is I go back to kind of, the COVID era where, I can't go to my local grocery store because they require papers to get in, and they've got an armed individual standing out in front of the grocery store checking people's papers. I'm not going to do that. I refuse to do that in this country. So I've got to drive an hour and a half out of town, wasting all that gas money to pay even higher prices at the next town over. I don't know about anybody else, but a lot of people had to do that during COVID, but I can tell you that I probably can't afford to do that now. So, it's going to be tough, and we're going to have to make a lot of tough decisions, and we're going to have to examine alternative ways of getting logistics, and doing that is not easy, and it's most certainly not cheap. So you want to allow yourself for Murphy's Law to kick in, for checkpoints, high prices, papers, and all this bad stuff, which increases your costs. You need to prepare for that to come crashing down all at the same day on the same weekend, because that's probably what's going to happen. Not saying it's going to, but I'm just saying it would be a pretty good idea to plan for, right? And again, one of the reasons why I'm so focused on this, I know that it probably is, people are complaining about high food prices in America, but they're not having to deal with widespread famine. We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people dying a year because of malnourishment. Now, food insecurity here in the Western world is getting to be pretty bad, and I am really leaning forward into this so that we could prevent this as much as possible. Just to show one random statistic here, last year, the fourth quarter of 2023, so over the winter time, the grocery store chain Barnardo's in Ireland did a study in which they found that over 40% of Irish citizens were skipping meals so that they could feed their child. 40%. You're 40% in a Western nation, in a nation where the economy is not horribly bad. It's not like Somalia, right? This is the Western world, and you've got 40% of people skipping meals so that they can feed their child. For me, this makes me extremely, blindingly angry, beyond all comprehension, right? But it also makes me extremely motivated to try to do what I can to help prevent this. I personally, I can't do very much, right? The average person out there, if you're watching this by yourself, you probably can't do very much either, but you can do something. You can do something. In the United States, Canada as well, I guess, Western Europe, the UK, places like that, I think that there's a lot of discourse and there's a lot of anger, angst, conflict between the haves and the have-nots, between the left and the right, the up and the down, whatever, right? There's a lot of conflict between us versus them. As complex as this situation is, I think that really there's going to be a lot of have-nots helping out a lot of other have-nots. It's going to be pretty rough. And I think that in a lot of situations, it's not going to be like 2003 again, where the average soldier in Iraq is, handing out his MRE to a starving kid. I think it's going to be along the lines of that soldier being very, very hungry too. So we're going to have people manning and working with food banks that are facing food insecurity themselves. We're going to have people running charity events that are just barely above that charity threshold themselves. And it's going to be very, very tough. And I think that we need to cut people a lot of slack when it comes to this, because it's very, very hard. And it's going to get even harder for people out there. So I'm, in the mindset of, well, let's do the best we can. And we might have to temper expectations in doing so. There's going to be no savior with a blank check show up and help us. We really have to do it ourselves, and in doing so, I think that it's important for us to have the capabilities that we can. I know that every generation that has existed since the dawn of time has complained about the times they're living in, or every generation has basically had the story of, well, when I was a kid, I had to go to school, walk to school through the snow, uphill, both ways, right? We all have that. Even the ancient philosopher Cicero was talking about, kids these days, they don't listen to their parents and all they want to do is write their books. It's like, we've had this idea going around for a very, very long time. But I do, at the risk of sounding disingenuous, I do think that this time period we're living through, maybe not this one generation, but definitely the time we're living through is very, very special. I think that those who come after us are going to write books about us either way, so we might as well make these books worth reading. I think that we need to live our lives in such a way that we are worthy of the admiration and the respect that people may or may not attribute to us in the future. I don't think that we're going to achieve this respect by shouting louder than the next guy or having an us versus them mentality, but I also think that we're not going to achieve this by laying down and giving up, right? Because there are a lot of deliberate attacks on the very people that built human civilization and keep civilization going. So I'm not saying that those people, need to give in and let these people take over. No, we're not going to do that. But in any case, I'm just some random guy on the internet, right? Well, I don't know much. I hardly know anything, to be honest. But I do know this. I do know that small things help, right? And I do know that working on the small goals, small achievable goals that you can actually make happen are going to be a prerequisite for the big stuff, for working on the big actions and working on bigger, more complex issues. If I've got somebody on my team and they can't handle a simple task, I'm not going to give them a big task, right? So it's the same thing in society. We have to get the little things right before we can do the big things right. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like there's a sense of pressure, like a sense of foreboding, if you want to call it that, but it's not necessarily negative. It's a sense of urgency, like the clock is ticking, Maybe not to a specific event, or anything, but it seems like we're rapidly approaching something. What it is, I don't know. I'm not saying the apocalypse is going to happen tomorrow. I mean, who knows? But I'm just saying that I just feel like this pressure every single day to do the absolute best I can every single day. And it's something that I have tried to, implement in my life over the years, but nowadays it's actually really happening, and it's happening naturally. I'm not trying to do this. It's just something that's just a drive, that you feel every single day. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. And going back to what I kind of said at the beginning, one of the kind of ways to wrap this up is to realize that keeping your options open is going to be very, very important. When it comes to physical preparedness, prepping, if we want to call it that, you keep your options open, doing that by having water, food, shelter, sanitation, things like this. Physical gear that can keep your options open when those options are removed from society, when the water doesn't work, when the electricity is turned off. You want to have options, right? The option to eat and have water and things like that. That's what it means to prep. Well, guess what? We also need to prepare more socially. And I think that beyond prepping, a lot of the issues that we're facing in society are going to come to a head on a social front, more along the lines of a preparedness front. You can stockpile as many cans of beans as you want, but I think a lot of people right now are finding out that those cans of beans aren't helping them to build their community together. Now, it's the bare minimum, right? We could stockpile cases and cases of ammo, right, for the SHTF situation, but I think a lot of times people have found out that, spending 15 years accruing, a decent-sized armory it's not solved any of the problems that they're facing today. Preparing for social problems is a thing as well. Being able to understand yourself, understand the world around you, or at least try to, and try to realize a lot of dualities, right? I don't have everything all figured out. I'm sorry. I don't have a lot of the answers, and I'm searching for them right now, right? I don't know what to tell you. On some regards, I think a lot of the population is unsavable when it comes to what we can do as humans. I think that they're unsavable, and I'm not really speaking to them. Same thing with, unfortunately, a lot of the community around me, They may have similar values, but those differences are just enough to be worth standing your ground on. On the other hand, I want to keep the door open for anyone who's willing to realize that they need to make a change in their life. And I want to do this because I would have wanted someone to keep that door open for me, So at the end of the day, it's really just about keeping your options open, physically with preparedness, but also when it comes to the people in your life, or people who may be in your life or may come into your life. We need to work on this a lot more than we are right now. I certainly do. And all of this is to say that I have never, ever, ever regretted having more options in a contingent situation or during an emergency. And unfortunately, a lot of the emergencies that we're likely to face as this year gets a little bit crazier, they're not going to be oriented with gear. The emergencies, the preparedness you might have to make might be with your community. This is why it's as scary as this stuff is to talk about. I really am excited. I really am. I don't want to, end on a negative note here after I've ranted for an hour about how awful the world is. No, I want to talk about the bad, but, end on the good note, which is that this is some very exciting stuff. Can you imagine how amazing of a time this is to live? We've got all the bad stuff, but let me tell you something. For every bad thing that happens in the world, we have an opportunity to do good. This is amazing, right? We have the chance to do some really, really great things. We don't live in boring times at all. We have a chance to do something. Now, this doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's not going to mean that we're not going to suffer and have some pretty tough times, right? What is it they say? The best things in life are free. That's very true, but what is also true is that nothing worth having comes easy. Just because it's free doesn't mean it's easy. And I think that you'll find that some of the most free things in the world end up being very, very difficult and daily challenges. So we have a choice, don't we? We can wallow in fear. We can buy random junk on the internet, and we can seethe at our phone screens every single day of our lives. Or we could do something about it. Now, I know that opinions vary quite widely on how to improve the world around them, but here's the good news. As this world gets a little bit more serious, and as things go downhill, the good stuff, the good courses of action are going to be a lot easier to identify. Right now, it's how many people do you see out there planting trees and picking up trash on the street? These little things that used to be a part of daily life many years ago certainly are very much appreciated now. It's the little things that are really not debatable, right? The little things to improve the world around you. Not just physically, but, socially. Getting to know people. Getting to understand what people's life experiences are and working through that, especially people who you may not agree with. We're never going to change the world by simply shouting at each other back and forth. And I don't want to hear of any of this, it's too hard garbage. No. I don't want to hear any of this, but they are too powerful. No, I don't want to hear any of this. This is just excuses. Yeah, I get it. You're not going to change the world. You're not going to change the U.S. government in one fell swoop. That's not going to happen. But these little things add up. And let me tell you something. The kids out there, they're watching you. The kids out there in the world today, those young people are watching what we are doing right now. And they're basing their worldview on it. So imagine yourself every single day like someone is watching you, right? That's what integrity means, right? Doing the right thing even when nobody's watching. Just every single day that goes by, imagine yourself teaching the future generations that are going to come after us. We may not be able to change the world within our generation. It may not be within 2 or 3 generations. But it's going to happen soon. The pendulum's swinging. Things are going to equalize. It's going to pan out in the future. Somebody said one time that very few generations have the honor of being able to defend freedom in its hour of maximum danger. And that person was right. But there's more to it than that. It's not just freedom that's at stake. It's the very way of life on this planet that is really at stake in many different regards. I hate to sound like it's so severe, but it really is. And we have a chance to do the right thing. And we're going to start by doing very small things first. I could just go on for hours and hours and hours about the little things that help. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to decide that for yourself. I think we've got a lot of big ideas here. We've certainly got our work cut out for us. There's a lot of work to be done. And one could argue, I personally may think, that the amount of work we have to do based on the time we have left is, I can do the math here, and we just don't have enough time left to do the work that we need to do. But hey, that's okay. It doesn't mean, that's not an excuse not to try, right? I don't know what's going to happen with this election season. I really don't. I think that just generally, and this is probably just a lazy assessment, things are going to get crazy. You're going to have probably the same stuff that happened come back, riots, all kinds of stuff. We know how the election itself is going to go. I think that's fairly clear, even though people somehow are still debating it. I don't understand, but I think we all know how that's going to go. I'm also leaving kind of the assessment open for events that may happen. We may have some pretty serious false flag attacks, real attacks, all kinds of stuff. We've got, just read the news, we've got some pretty serious issues here, and I think that some of these issues are going to come to a head pretty soon. But in terms of the grand experience, right, we're just getting, this is the early look, right, the grand thing of things to start thinking about, and probably more importantly, the ways of thinking. This is the kind of things I'm thinking about for now. So I think I've rambled on long enough. I think this gives plenty to think about, and I look forward to kind of moving forward into the more exciting stuff of more deliberate preparedness kind of things, more specific things that I'm trying to do to provide as best I can for people during this crisis. And we'll get to those topics at a later date. So thank you all for watching. Thank you all for putting up with my ramblings here. And I really do mean it when I say that I am very excited for the good things that we can do. Because, like I said, we can focus on the bad, we can let that consume us, or we can be overly excited about the potential that for every bad thing in the world, there's a chance for us to do the right thing. And I'm never going to turn down an opportunity to do the right thing, or at least try to, right? So that's the kind of mentality I'm moving forward with, and I hope that it helps for a lot of you out there, even if, for now, we may have to fight in the shade.